So since the last video where I had the Zynq-7000 sock, the DDRs, and the 1.0 volt rail, I have continued to populate the PCB. I think I'm pretty close to having enough on there that I can now try to see if I can recognize this sock from some of the Xilinx software. Maybe real quick what I have populated here. Again, I have the 1.0 volt rail. There was a note on the last video, a comment from a viewer saying that don't turn on just the 1.0 volt rail. Now that's the first rail you should turn on, but don't turn that on by itself without the other supporting rails coming on right after it. This sock might not be happy with only having the 1.0 volt rail. So just a word of warning for those watching the videos here. If that is going to be the case, I will find out if I damage the sock or not. But I wasn't aware that having just the 1.0 volt by itself would cause any issues, because it seemed like there's other things here that need to be seen before it's going to really fire up all the way. But I guess we'll find out what damage, if any, I might have caused with that. So heads up on that. But I do have all those components. Each of these will have an LED indicator. The 0.675 volt that has to do with the DDR termination here. That LED indicator is not working. The specific MOSFET that I'm using, I just did a little testing with it. It requires about a volt, and so there's not enough voltage here for me to get this LED indicator lit up. If I jump over to my schematic and I look at my power, actually regulators, I've got this DDR3 bus termination voltage, this 0.675. And so I was just going to try this BSH103 and see if that would work with 0.675 to some extent. And it doesn't. I did a little testing, and it really needs about a volt to be used. And so I'll have to see if there's an alternative I could drop in here, or just simply go without that indicator, which is really not a big deal. All the termination, resistors, there's a bunch of capacitors over here off to the right. So all of that. I have dip switches for my boot mode. I have a reset switch, my header for programming, and I'll talk more about programming in a little bit. That header, I was actually hoping to do a slightly different size header on that, and I'll come back to that, I guess, here in just a little bit and talk about that. Flipping the board over, I do have a power on reset circuit. There is my flash, a whole bunch of capacitors and other components, maybe some resistors that have to go with the DDR. And then around the sock itself, some bulk capacitors, all the way down to these tiny little 0201s that are underneath the sock itself. So lots of capacitors, some different miscellaneous resistors are in there too. Ferrite beads, things like that are spread out through the board for analog power. I think this was one of the ferrite beads here, and I think there were a couple on the backside too. But I think that's about it as the components. So maybe a couple of things I might point out. I'll flip into my microscope, my digital microscope, for a second. When I look at these power rails, most of this stuff, I'm using these 0603 size components, and after going and working on the 0201s, these seem huge. So that's kind of I guess it was really good practice to go in and do that. So if I look at the back side here, maybe here's the bottom. So let's see if I can focus this a little bit. But those are all 0201s, and I got one that's a little bit off, and that was giving me a little bit of a trouble. Probably this one right there, just slightly angled, but that's not a big deal. But those are 0201s, and then as I come over to the left, I've got some 0402s and some 0603s. but lots of capacitors throughout all of that. So hopefully, as I assembled all this, I grabbed the right resistor values, capacitor values, etc. But I did find that the soldering the 0201s really wasn't that terrible. That seemed to go through for the most part pretty well. The biggest thing is just finding the right tip on my soldering iron, and I did find a tip that I really like for that let me go through those pretty fast. And then, like I said, after I did those, coming up to some of these up here further, that like these 0402s are quite easy to solder, and then the 0603s are really easy to solder at this point. So that's all been good practice. So if anything, I guess I got good soldering practice putting this all together. Maybe some other comments as I've gone through this. When it comes to programming this, I have some choices of programmers. So one is this little guy here. This is a Digilent. Oh, and actually I grabbed the HS2. I have an HS3 also. I don't know where I set it, but the intention would be that I could just plug this in and use this to program the sock. But I didn't quite realize as I was doing the design, that was my intention, I think, to be able to plug this in directly, but you might not be able to see it real well in the video, but this is a 2.0 millimeter pitch, and I did a 2.54 millimeter pitch on the header, so that's a problem if I want to just directly connect this. So maybe some ways around that. I did just grab, because I didn't want to wait to order my own PCB, I just grabbed one of these little adapter boards, and it has the 2.54 headers and the 2.0 headers, so I think I can just solder on a little, what is this, a 2x7? So I'll just solder on a 2x7 2.0 millimeter, and then the same for the 2.54, and that way I could just run a little ribbon over here and then plug this into this adapter board. So that's a quick way around if I want to use the HS3. It looks just like this, but it says HS3. The other options I guess I have, I do have one of these programmers. This is the platform cable USB, and I can use this little adapter in here and then just plug these into the appropriate pins over on the board, I believe. In addition to that, I've got the platform cable USB 2. And then finally, I also have this Smart Link. So I think all of these can program this technically, but that's all stuff I'm gonna have to learn. And I'll probably just start with the HS3 as my first attempt to try to connect to this and see if I can find that device. As I was going through working on this, I did find a document that does talk about power off sequencing. So right now I'm only doing power on sequencing. I'm not doing any power off sequencing. So I have to do a little bit more reading about that, but it seems like if that isn't done properly, it can mess up some E fuses that could permanently damage the sock. So that maybe if I get to the stage of another revision on this board, that's maybe something I'll try to look more into. But I think my next step is to try to get, this connection of components, again, the HS3, not the HS2, plugged into this little board, and then a little ribbon to plug in over here. Actually, that'll flip over like this, do something like that. And start learning some of the Zynq software and utilities to see if I can do something with this here. Another note I might make here real quick, if I jump out to my blog, I did switch hosting providers, and I didn't have an easy way to bring the old content over. But I did, under archive, put a link to the old site. So it's a different domain now, but all the content is still there, including this write-up I've been doing as I go on this. So I have some updating to do on that. And probably my next whatever project, I'll start using my new blog domain instead of the old one. But I did want to come down and maybe point out a couple of things. One of the resources I've been using quite a bit that's been very handy is some of this training content from Phil's lab. Between Phil's lab and also there's training content here on this FedEval. So that's been handy, but one of the things that I noticed Phil has is a video on trying to use the HS3 to do some initial work, just to recognize the sock and maybe get something really basic programmed onto it. So I'll probably jump over to that and watch that video in its entirety and see if I can find that I can recognize this. Now, if things don't work here, there are a lot of reasons it might not work. So some of the things that I might have for challenges is the design, the schematic is incorrect, either in a minor way or major way. Being an 8-layer board, if there is something, especially under a BGA, that's not going to the right spot or something like that, I'm going to have a really hard time, doing anything about that. There was also potential issues I caused when I brought up just the 1.0 volt rail, so possibly that could have damaged the sock. There could be a number of soldering issues. I've tried to be very careful as I go on the soldering, but this is probably one of the larger BGAs I've soldered, and I don't have x-ray equipment or anything like that to see what that solder, how well that solder job was done for those BGA balls. And same for the DDR. I'm assuming, with the DDR not working, I still should be able to work with the sock itself. I just won't have access to DDR if that's not working. Of course, there's all the PCB work, whether or not my traces, impedance, and length matching and all that stuff was close enough or good enough to get this to fire up and work. That's another potential problem. And I think the list goes on and on and on. And as I've been going through assembling this, just kind of reflecting on all the things that could go wrong, if it just absolutely doesn't work, I have a lot of unknowns, and we'll have to just kind of do some testing, one thing at a time, for the things I can control, like swapping out the sock if it comes to that. But if it comes down to something with the PCB, then I'll have to decide what the next step might be, if I want to spin another PCB or not. I likely would, but I just want to see. I think the complexity level of this is high, and I'm hoping that I've got a little bit of luck on my side as I move forward on this. But more to come in the next video. Maybe one thing I would do just at the very end here, I guess I could just show you that if I bring on power onto this, I've got my 5-volt coming in. I've got a blue LED for that. I've got my other rails here with their indicators. I did test the voltage on this. I did a community post where I showed the actual voltages I'm getting out of this. So if any of you are curious on seeing that, I had posted that before, and I can probably put that video in this video when I edit it. I can put that image into if you want to see what those voltages look like. And that was before, I guess, I finished populating everything. So maybe what I could do is just do some real quick voltage probes here, I guess, and see if things are still looking okay, because I have not tried it again since I finished populating the rest of this stuff. And when I say the rest of the stuff, it's enough to hopefully, make the sock work. When I have not hooked up things like an SD card, Ethernet, this additional USB-Fi, or even down here to be able to program via USB. Again, I'm going to start out with this JTAG, HDMI output. None of that stuff I'm going to populate until I validate I've got something workable so far. So maybe I will just come in here and check some of the voltages. And let's see. So right now I'm getting a 3.2733. I'm just going to leave that there. This down here is a 1.8105. So 1.8105. This one is a 1.0045. 1.3682. And then I think right here, let's see if I can find which one of these has my output voltage. Yeah, 0.6916. And I think those are all within, let's see, 69. Yeah, that should all be within. Even if I want to go 5%, 5 to 10%. So good enough for this update. And like I said, in the next video, hopefully I will have something like this arrangement here connected to USB to my workbench PC, and see if I can scan for and find this sock. So if you're a betting person, you can put a bet. What's the chances of that actually being recognizable? I'll give myself a 25% chance. So we'll see if my odds are that good or not on that being workable. But if you've got any bets, feel free to drop them in the comments. But otherwise, more to come in the next video. Thanks, everybody.